I'm a third-generation cop. My dad and grandfather were city cops, and they always told me that you have to like two things when you join the police: walking and driving. I like driving, always have. And I like the open spaces more than I like big cities. So the California Highway Patrol was a perfect fit for me. There's a lot of scenery during the day on 395 outside Bishop, but at night, there's a whole lot of nothing. Just your headlights and the road, an empty sky, and the shadows of scrub and cactus, and the occasional snake or coyote on the road. Normally, I like desert country, but it's not the kind of place you want to have car trouble. Of course, that can and does happen. I've seen a lot of stuff happen in my 15 years on the force. Everything from the aftermath of a 20-car pileup, an old-fashioned bank robbery, and yes, getting a cat out of a tree. Well, it was actually getting a puppy out of a drain pipe, but the point stands. And that point is, there are some things that nothing prepares you for. Like that one night on Route 395. As a highway patrol officer, I spend a lot of my time patrolling for drivers that have had the bad luck to have their car overheat or a tire blow. It happens more often than you think, and there are plenty of people who have no idea how to change a tire. So when I do have to stop, I'm used to lending a helping hand. That's what I was doing one evening in July. I was on my regular patrol when dispatch called to say there was a stranded motorist somewhere south of Fish Springs, down by the Tinimaha Reservoir. I was already headed south on 395 at that point, so I radioed that I was on my way. Dispatch advised that a tow truck had been called, but they had a 2-hour delay and the motorist was pregnant. When I pulled up behind the car, I couldn't see any obvious problems with it. It was just pulled up on the side of the road. I made sure my spotlight was on the driver for a second so I could see how and where she was. Once I did, I popped open my door and walked over to the car. The driver was definitely pregnant, but she told me she wasn't hurt and that she wasn't close enough to term to have to worry about delivering. I was trained to handle it if she'd gone into labor, but I was glad it wasn't going to be an issue. I asked her if she had an updated ETA on the tow truck. She didn't, and asked if she'd like me to inspect her car to see if I could figure out what the problem was. She gave me permission to check under the hood. As I walked to the front of the car, I could smell something odd. It smelled sweet, like an odd candy. A quick sweep of my flashlight around the engine showed the kind of problem I couldn't help much with. Her radiator was definitely overheating, which might not have been so bad, but that sweet smell was stronger than ever, and that meant coolant leak. I told the lady, she said her name was Lee, that I was sorry, but she'd definitely need that tow truck since it was a radiator problem. She wasn't happy about it, but since she wasn't alone out in the desert anymore, she was ready to wait. It was a hot night and the heat from the day made the ground still feel warm, and I bellied out to see if I could spot any leaks from the undercarriage. I saw one almost immediately. This wasn't from a loose hose. This was a lot worse. I was pushing myself back up to my feet when I heard something off the road. I froze for a moment to listen. Aside from the pinging metal as the car cooled off very, very slowly, I thought I could hear a clicking noise. I checked with the driver, but she was on the phone with the tow company and wasn't looking like she heard anything. I radioed dispatch that the motorist wasn't in any immediate danger and that I'd wait with her until the tow truck got to the scene. After I did that, I checked back under the hood again and tapped the coolant hose with my finger to check a theory. The whole thing disintegrated at the touch. I've had that happen to me before. Old hose, old plastic, everything just fragments into plastic bits. I knew this little red sedan wasn't going anywhere without that tow. I closed the hood and let the driver know what I found. She told me that the tow truck had gotten free earlier than they'd thought and was on its way. Good news, right? As I walked back to my cruiser, I heard that clicking sound again. I'd spent a lot of time on this highway and I've heard a lot of desert sounds, but this one sounded different. Sound travels differently out here, but this was a clicking noise I couldn't place. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and my shoulders tightened. Something was off out here. I didn't know what it was. I swept my flashlight out into the desert past the cars. There were no other cars on the road still, and I couldn't see anything moving out there. The clicking noise stopped. After a minute, I tried to relax. The woman opened her car door and asked if something was wrong. I didn't want to scare her by telling her I had a bad feeling, but I also didn't want to put her in danger. I asked her if she'd be more comfortable waiting in my patrol car. She looked at me as if she knew something was off, but she didn't ask any questions. I radioed dispatch again, telling the operator that I was moving the motorist to my cruiser for safety. When the operator asked what the concern was, I really didn't know what to tell her. I think I said I had a bad feeling, which sounds incredibly unprofessional, but I didn't have anything else to offer. The clicking sound came again. It was closer. I got both of us in the cruiser and hit my lights and siren full blast. I let that go on for a full 15 seconds before I cut the sirens and listened again. Nothing. The hot, dry night was dead quiet. After a bit, the regular sounds of the desert came back. Little skitterings from a lizard. Something flew overhead. The normal nighttime calls. Lee eyed me nervously. She probably thought I was crazy. I apologized and then explained as professionally as I could that I thought I heard something and that I wasn't willing to risk her and her baby's safety if I was wrong. To keep her calm, I started asking her about the usual pregnancy stuff. Do you know what you're having? When you do? She calmed down and we had a nice conversation, but all the while, I was watching the dark desert beyond the road. I can't remember the last time I'd ever been so happy to see a tow truck pull up, and I've been at the scene of some pretty nasty accidents. A big man hopped out of the cab, pulled on a reflective safety vest, and walked over to us. Lee got the paperwork sorted out, and I told him what I'd seen with the coolant hose. The operator assured us that I got this, and went to go hook up Lee's car. He was just about finished connecting the chains when the night went quiet again. The clicking started up in the desert again. This time, there was more of it. Not just off to the side. It came from ahead of us, behind us. I don't know what it was, but I did know it had friends. The tow operator gave me a look. I gave him one back. My hand went to my gun, and I keyed my shoulder mic to tell dispatch the car was being towed, and that there seemed to be something in the desert. To my absolute shock, the operator got very grim. Get out of there. Fortunately, we could do that. The tow operator, John according to his name tag, hopped in his truck and I got back in my cruiser. We both got back to the road as fast as we could. As I started following the tow truck, my headlights caught something approaching from the desert, and I say something because to this day I have no idea what I saw. It was low, fast. So fast all I got was an impression that it was covered in short pale fur because I couldn't see anything else. At first I thought it was a coyote. They're fast and about that size. But it wasn't a dog shape. It was, and this sounds even more nuts now, more like a person. I've heard of people who went nuts from drugs, but I've never heard of one who went around crawling on all fours in the middle of the desert at midnight. Lee said something from the back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror as I answered, and 15-year veteran or not, I felt my blood run cold. There was something following my car. Several small, skittering forms crawling at top speed after me. I hit my lights and my siren in a few short bursts, hoping that John would get the message and speed up. Whatever was behind us couldn't keep up, but the thing certainly tried. It's been a few years, and while I've been called out to that stretch of Route 395 since that night, I've never seen those things again. I do still keep in touch with John from Sims Towing from time to time. And he tells me that he's heard the clicking noises in the desert every so often, but that he hasn't had another encounter since then. I hope that means the things moved deeper into the desert and not closer to the towns or campgrounds. Guess I'll just wait and see if any stories come floating up the grapevine. Not a lot of people from outside Montana know about the beauty of Flathead Lake. Unless you're really invested in the world of fishing, there isn't much reason to learn about our little body of water. Well, I shouldn't say little, I guess. Flathead Lake is massive, almost 200 square miles if I remember right. You can check that, I know I'm not too far off. You can check any part of this story, actually. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love to know what happened on the surface of Flathead Lake. I'd settle for anything other than what I believe right now. I was out kayaking, one side to the next. I don't recommend doing it alone if it's your first time. As for me, I've been kayaking plenty of times, more than a dozen, but I'd never challenged myself with something as great as the 25-mile length of Flathead. I'd been to the lake plenty of times too, hiking the perimeter, fishing from the bank, and skimming the surface in a kayak or a canoe. It's a favorite date spot of mine, actually. Everyone loves a little time on the water, especially at sunset. I don't think I'll be taking anyone back to Flathead anytime soon, though. That sunset view is important. I forgot about that. I timed my day so that the last stretch of my journey would happen right at dusk. I wanted to relax at the finish line and watch the sky change colors. Then I'd pack up and head home. A friend of mine would be waiting with a trailer to tow my kayak. I didn't make it there on time. As the day started to wind down, the surface of the lake got more and more empty. Tourists were going home, fishermen were going to grab a bite to eat before returning to catch whatever they could under the cover of darkness. That was maybe the first time I was actually alone on Flathead. It's at least the first time I remember. Maybe that's because of what happened next. I was maybe 3/4 through my route when I saw something sticking out of the water. It looked like tree branches, long and wiry, rising out of the surface. Now, plant life can come loose in the lake at any time. Trees can fall and be washed into the water, only to turn up later, more buoyant and rotten. Something about this was different, though. The way the branches broke the surface and split into multiple limbs, it reminded me of elk's antlers. My dad used to keep one above the fireplace. That itch of nostalgia convinced me to go investigate. I knew the horns or branches or whatever they weren't naturally occurring in that spot. I expected to run into a log, push it aside, and return to my night on Flathead. The branches didn't budge, not at first. They were certainly buoyant or floating, and they definitely didn't show any signs of being strips of rotted wood. They were covered in something smooth and damp. It reminded me of a fish skin. Small scales, so tightly grouped that they feel like one smooth surface. It was all wrong, all of it. That sense of touch had me so confused that I convinced myself that this mystery was mine to solve. I grabbed the branches with both hands and tried to shake them. Then something moved under the water. There was a ripple on the surface that rocked my kayak. The branches turned, as if there were eyes attached to each stalk that wanted to look my way. They rose a bit, maybe 3 inches out of the water. Maybe I had knocked it loose, I thought. So I leaned over the edge to get a better look. The shape under the surface wasn't a tree. It was a fish, I think. It looked like one. I'd cast my line enough times to identify the things that lived in Flathead. This one looked like a sturgeon. A massive, frightening sturgeon, 20 feet long, long enough to shake any man. I could see its head. I could see the massive antlers running all the way back to its skull. If I could have jumped from my kayak to the shore, I'm sure I would have. I yelled, I flailed, I almost capsized, I think. The fish jerked away from my kayak and darted back down. Antlers disappeared from above the surface, knocking against the edge of my boat as they disappeared. I got out of there as quickly as I could. I told my friend, who insisted we call the Office of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. They dismissed me immediately. I tried to go federal. The National Park Service came to speak to me, but spent the entire conversation asking if I'd been drinking on the boat that day. I showed them the scratches on my kayak where the antlers scuffed the edge. They told me not to call again. They said if I did, that I'd be arrested. Do they have the authority to do that? Crime would I be guilty of exactly? It didn't make sense to me then, and it doesn't now, but what am I supposed to do? I asked around after that. I talked to some locals. I'm not the only one who's seen something on that lake. Apparently, weird sightings go back for hundreds of years. Could the fish I saw have been that old? I didn't think something like that was possible. But I felt it in my own hands. I touched it, you know? I can't pretend that it didn't happen. It's all I talk about now. My friends, even the one who was there that day, have started to look at me with fatigue and concern. I'm that guy. I'm the guy at the bar telling a story that you don't believe. After all, you don't believe me, do you? I work for this company that does cruises in Alaska. Not the big cruise ships, but small boats, like the ones they use on river cruises. About a dozen to 24 people at a time. I do the laundry, clean, all that kind of thing. We basically live on the boat with a group of people for a few days to a week, while guides take them fishing, hiking, canoeing, and whatever. Only in the summer, obviously. In winter, I stay in Sitka. I do little jobs for the city or whatever I can get. As soon as spring hits, though, we start getting ready for tourist season. I usually help get the company's boats ready. Cleaning mostly, since I'm not that handy with tools. Sometimes the company sends text out to everyone, stuff like, go easy on the glass cleaner, prices are up, or please remember to restock the toilet paper in the bathrooms. But one day, I was scrubbing the boat deck when I got a weird one. It was one of those disappearing texts, which I'd never seen before. It said, no matter what, do not mention Mothman to the guests. When I looked back at my phone later, the message was gone. I'd heard rumors about Mothman over the winter. Mostly it was stories of people seeing red eyes staring at them out of the dark. People get bored here in winter, tell all kinds of stories. Big moose they've seen or fish they caught. Couple of days later, I went out on my first boat tour of the season. Nothing special. We did the usual, going out to see the glaciers, fishing, etc. Since I'm not a guide, I spend most of my time on the boat. I get a little tired of being there all the time, so in the evening, I'll go out on the deck, even if it's cold, and sit for a while. One evening I was out there when I saw something standing on the shore in the distance. I thought it was a person at first, but then it turned and looked right at me. It had glowing red eyes, and its face just wasn't there. Like, I could see it was just a black hole. I could feel it looking at me, sense it even, but I couldn't look away. While it was staring at me, it started to unfold these huge wings. They just seemed to get bigger and bigger. I could feel myself backing away, even though I hadn't thought about moving. The wings started to move and it took off. I was terrified it was going to come toward the boat, and I didn't know what to do. First, how could I protect the people on the boat from this creature? Second, I wasn't allowed to say it existed. But it didn't come towards us. It flew away into the forest. Now, it was getting dark, but I knew what I saw. It was a person-sized thing with wings, no question. I couldn't tell anyone, though. So I just went down to my little cabin way at the bottom of the boat and laid on the bunk for a while, shaking. The next evening, I didn't want to stand there again, but I did. I had to see if it reappeared, though I didn't know what I would do if I did see it. There was an old guy on that tour named Zach. While I was standing there, nervously staring at the shoreline, he came up next to me and handed me a drink. I didn't know what was in it, but I didn't care. I took it. He didn't say anything, just stood there with me. I didn't know what I'd do if I saw it now. What if he asked what I thought it was? Should I lie? We were fairly near the shoreline by Sturgis Narrows. The sun was setting. As I scanned the shore, my heart rate sped up. A pair of red eyes was watching us from the trees. This time, all I could see was the eyes. I looked at the old man and he was looking where I was, but he didn't say anything, just sipped his drink. After a while, the eyes disappeared. We have another boat that does a similar cruise at the same time. I got another disappearing text that night. It said that a guest had gone missing from that cruise. The next text said, "Never let a guest go off into the woods alone. Everyone hikes in a group." Of course, that was already a rule for our company, so the only reason for that text had to be the person went missing because they wandered away from the group on a hike. That message disappeared after a while too. I went out to the deck the next night and Zach joined me again. He handed me a drink that I was pretty sure was a gin and tonic. "It's gone," he said. I knew what he was talking about, at least I thought I did. But I still said, "What?" "The Mothman. It ate that woman and left," he said. I stared at him. How did he know about the woman? We weren't supposed to tell anyone. Obviously, the company didn't want all the guests to get scared and leave. "The woman from the other boat?" I asked. "You know what I'm talking about," he said. "It'll move on. Can't kill too many people in one place." "Why?" I said. I don't know why I believed the guy, but he seemed to know what he was talking about. "'Cause people would go after it, find it, kill it. It has to move around a lot. If just one or two people see it, the others just think they're crazy," he said. "If a bunch of people disappeared, they'll go looking for it?" I said. "Yeah," he said and went inside. I drank the rest of the drink and stood out there for a while. I didn't see anything. Not that night or the rest of the summer. I wonder if it'll be back next summer. I hope not.